When they try to get food on the way, you can't really buy food. The money is virtually worthless. Food is purchased by a system of barter, carried on at almost every station. We see Tonya, that is Zhivago's wife, going out of the train car when the train is stopping at a station with an old-fashioned embroidered Russian towel over her shoulder, beautifully embroidered with cockerels, oxbows, and wheels. It turns out that she can exchange this lovely old-fashioned towel for half a roasted hare. Such were the relative values of goods and money and food in a revolutionary time. Together with the other people on the train, there were people who'd been conscripted for heavy labor, rich, smart lawyers and stockbrokers, side by side with floor polishers and rag pickers, and even escaped lunatics. All of them were classified as members of the formerly exploiting classes by the Soviets, and are being brought out to do hard labor, to, so to speak, re-educate them in a new era. In still other freight cars were soldiers with rifles and bandoliers of cartridges hanging over their shoulders and around their waists. And when they came to a station and took food away from the vendors without paying, nobody dared argue with them. These soldiers, with their bandoliers of bullets, with their guns, of course, gave a good idea of the almost capricious kind of violence that could happen at any moment at that particular time of revolutionary reality. At one point, Yuri tries to leave the train when the train stops, he tries to go out and leave it to examine the countryside just to enjoy the nature. But of course, he's immediately surrounded by these people with their bandoliers, and he knows that he's not going to be able to go anywhere. He's going to have to get back on the train. At one particular incident of the journey, and perhaps one of the most remarkable areas, is where they come to, first of all, they come to a village which has been destroyed by revolutionary artillery. Not only was it completely burned out, but the road ahead was totally blocked by accumulated snow. The engineer tells them they're going to have to wait for 2 or 3 days until the snow is shoveled. The bosses of the soldiers on the train say, no, we can't wait for that. We have to get through. So what they do is to mobilize all the passengers on the train and put them each in various parts of where the snow is piled up, put shovels in their hands, and for 2 or 3 days they dig in the snow to dig the train out of the snow. And of course, in the process of digging, they get a sense of the power of the cold, the power of this nature. And when finally they have cleared away the snow, suddenly they see each other, the view that had been blocked by the snow that they were clearing away. The feeling of the snow on these shovels, the sight of the snow in their eyes, is something that's very, very, very impressive, very powerful. On the other hand, when the weather changed, the sky, drunk with spring and giddy with its fumes, these are the words of Pasternak, let down clouds drooping at the edges like felt, and rain leapt from them, warm, smelling of soil and sweat, washing the last armor plating of ice from the earth. It's clear that these words are the poetry and prose written by a powerful observer and inhabitant of nature. When they arrive in Siberia, they stay in a place formerly connected with Tonya's family. It's in the beautiful countryside, and it's a perfect place for Zhivago to work on his poems. Originally, of course, the people don't want to let him in, but eventually he convinces them that he is a member of the family that once upon a time had this property. So that he spends time in the isolation of the countryside, surrounded by this beautiful nature, beginning once again to write poems. You can see here that Zhivago is rather close to the experience of Pasternak. But eventually he goes into the city there named Yuryatyn, and of course, again, by coincidence, he meets Lara once more, who is living in Siberia. Now, one of the strongest criticisms that's been made against this novel is Pasternak's use of coincidence in a way that many readers consider stretched and clumsy. Contrast this to the coincidence we talked about in Tolstoy, where Tolstoy uses them in such a beautiful way that you hardly notice them. Here they strike your eyes. It's clear that Pasternak is much more a master of poetry than he is of the art of prose writing, and yet nevertheless the story manages to impress and manages to give the impression of the territory he's describing. The peace of the faraway Siberian location is still disturbed by the events of the Civil War. And when the Reds and the Whites both carry out repressions and atrocities that tend to destroy the fabric of civilization, you get a sense of what it means to be involved in a revolution. And yet Zhivago still finds the energy and passion to enter this time into a real liaison with Lara, thereby, by the way, betraying his own wife Tonya. Zhivago's illicit affair doesn't last long in this episode, however, because he's kidnapped by horsemen who are waiting for him in ambush along a main highway where he's going back on horseback toward his wife, brooding about how he's going to handle the business of having Lara in Yuriatin and his wife at home. The people who stop him are part of the so-called Forest Brotherhood, a group of revolutionaries who are trying to wrest control of Siberia from the hands of counter-revolutionary army of whites, who have at least temporarily taken over. Their former doctor was killed, and now they force Zhivago to come with them and provide medical services. And of course, what you see is Zhivago in the middle of Siberia with his Forest Brotherhood, forced to spend a whole year with them. And through his eyes, we see close up the mentality and the situation of people committed irrevocably to the movement which will establish the USSR, but a movement to which Yuri obviously cannot feel himself attached. Just as he's becoming more and more detached from his family and from all the people who are close around him, so when it comes to these revolutionary people, this is something that could never appeal to his sensibility, the sensibility of a genuine poet. What we see is bloody and obsessive to a terrible extreme, with a constant repetition of cliches appropriate only to self-satisfied people. This grates terribly on Zhivago's poetic sensibilities, and yet he does give them loyal medical service and even a certain degree of human sympathy. We see some of the problems of the soldiers who were involved in this terrible campaign in the winter. They're forced to spend the terrible Siberian winter in the woods. Zhivago tries to take care of them. He sees how one particular man who's attached to his family slowly goes out of his mind and eventually gets into a situation where he murders his entire family. Of course, it's a terrible thing to observe. Yuri Zhivago tries desperately to help the man, to bring him back to sanity, but that's impossible. And then in the course of one battle with the whites, Yuri involuntarily is next to a soldier who is killed, has to pick up a rifle and shoot at the young white soldiers who are attacking the Forest Brotherhood with whom he's living. He has no choice but to fire this rifle in self-defense, but rather than shoot at these young white soldiers coming at them who are so close in sensibility to what he is, he shoots at a tree in order to try to avoid shooting them. But in spite of the fact that he's shooting at a tree, at one point, one of those soldiers manages to get in front of the tree while he's shooting, and he thinks that he's killed the young man. This particular episode aroused the particular ire of the Soviet censors who read the novel in manuscript. They bitterly attacked Pasternak for applying mercy to the white enemy, saying that he should have had his class consciousness there. He should have been willing to kill the enemy since he was fighting together with the revolutionary soldiers. After the battle is over, Yuri Zhivago discovers he hasn't actually killed the young man, he's only wounded him, and he manages to hide the young man, get a different uniform for him, and nurse him back to health, showing that Zhivago is not attached to any one side in this terrible revolutionary struggle. He's rather attached to humanity, he's rather attached to the idea of life itself. Finally, Zhivago does manage to escape in a very impressive scene where he embraces a rowanberry bush tree, a tree that gives red berries. He imagines that in embracing this tree, he's also embracing Lara's body. Having embraced this tree, which also plays a great role in Russian folklore, he manages to leave the Forest Brotherhood camp and through a very, very difficult walk, make his way back to Yuriatin, to the city where he had been, to the city where Lara is living. He manages to get into Lara's apartment only to fall prey to a terrible weakness, something like typhus, and she has to nurse him back to health. Meanwhile, of course, his family, his wife and his child has already left Siberia, going back to Moscow, and he's left once again alone with Lara. Lara's presence, however, has become politically dangerous because her husband, formerly Pavel Antipov, now called by the military sobriquet of Strelnikov, has gotten into a politically dangerous situation. The Red government is now turned against him, but because they feel he's become too independent with his troops, so that it's clear that they have to leave the city of Yuriatin. Since people are looking for Strelnikov, they'll also be looking for his wife, Lara. So Zhivago and Lara go back into the countryside, and here we have a very short but a very beautiful scene where the two of them, together with Lara's child, are alone out in the Siberian wilderness in a small cabin that had formerly belonged to the Zhivago family, a place where all of their humanity comes out, a place where all their warmth comes out, a place where Yuri once more turns to poetry. But he realizes they can't stay there very long. Komarovsky has once again found them and has offered them a chance to get out of Siberia, to go to the east, where the whites are still in control. A man named Kolchak has declared himself the ruler of Siberia. We know that this isn't going to last very long. The Reds are eventually going to take over Siberia, but this is an interval in which Lara and the whole family can escape. Lara refuses to leave without Zhivago coming with her. Zhivago has no intention of leaving Russia, but he realizes that she has to leave in order to save her life, and so he pretends to her that she should go ahead with Komarovsky. He will come behind. And of course, in that last scene as she goes out, he sees her at a distance, realizing that he'll never see her again. Zhivago is thus left almost completely alone. Here is the individualist full-blown in the novel, in a situation where people are talking about collectivism, where people are talking about socialism, where people are talking about people in groups. Here he is completely on his own, and he makes his way back to Moscow, where he tries somehow to pick up his life, but the life, of course, is not to be picked up. He tries to make connections with other people. It's impossible for him to make connections with other people. He represents a psychology and a way of life that is completely out of tune with anything that exists in socialism, in the society which was trying to build socialism at that time. He tries to get back into medicine. He tries to write poetry. He tries all kinds of things, but somehow he's a man never in the right place in the right time. Eventually, he's riding in an overcrowded trolley car where you can't even open the window. And as he looks out the window, he thinks he sees Lara. He sees a woman who seems to him to resemble Lara. He strives desperately, first of all, to raise the window and then to get out of the car. And, of course, his organism has been so weakened by the experience that he dies of a heart attack. And the cycle is complete. Dr. Zhivago has systematically separated himself, step by step, from any surrounding society in which he might have lived. He's separated from his classical Russian culture, from his family, from his friends, from his passionate love and mistress. The novel defines the lot of the individual in a tragic and moving way. And of course, Pasternak composed this novel in the midst of a society whose official ideology passionately dedicated itself to collectivism, deliberately ignoring the needs of countless thousands, even millions of individuals. At the very end, we see poems ostensibly created by Zhivago. The first poem eloquently states Pasternak's identification of the individual both with Hamlet, which is the title of the poem, and with Christ. Гул затих, я вышел на подмостки, прислонясь к вьяному косяку. Я ловлю в далеком отголоске, что случится на моем веку. На меня наставлен сумрак ночи, тысячи биноклей на оси. Если только можно, Ава Отче, чашу это мимо пронеси. He starts out as Hamlet on the stage. The noise has died down. I went out on the stage. I'm catching in a far-off echo what's happening in my century. Thousands of binoculars are trained from an axis on me. And then all of a sudden he's no longer Hamlet, but rather Christ. If it's only possible, Abba, Father, Abba, the Hebrew word for Father, let this cup pass from me. Но продуман распорядок действий, и неотвратим конец пути. Я один, все тонет в фарисействе, жизнь прожить, не поле перейти. But the order has been worked out, the end of the path is irretrievable, and I am alone, everything is drowning among Pharisees, and then he ends with a Russian proverb, to live life is more than to cross a field. Жизнь прожить, не поле перейти. Zhivago, as Pasternak, learns in his life that life is a very complicated business, not to be crossed the way one simply crosses a field.